I have two dads and two moms. They didn't let us live our own way of life and wanted to involve us in theirs. So I'm Jane. I'm 27, live in Oregon, and I guess you could say my family is progressive. At least, that's what they call it. To be honest, I'm still not entirely sure what to call it myself. Maybe weird, maybe deeply uncomfortable, but definitely not normal, at least not for me. My parents, Steve and Sharon, are in their mid-50s. They've been married for over 30 years and had me and my younger brother Ethan, who's 24. On the surface, they're your typical laid-back Pacific Northwest couple. Dad's a semi-retired software developer who now brews his own beer and listens to jazz on vinyl. Mom is a yoga instructor who still wears tie-dye and swears by oat milk and energy crystals. Growing up, I always thought they were kind of cool. A little eccentric, sure, but harmless. That image got absolutely shredded the day I found out they've been in a polyamorous relationship for years with another couple. Mark and Denise. Yup, for real. I first found out when I was about 22, home from grad school for the holidays. We were having one of those painfully long, forced family dinners where someone always brings up kale and someone else ends up yelling about politics. But that night, it was just different. My mom and Denise were way too handsy, like practically cuddling at the table. My dad and Mark kept making these weird, knowing glances at each other. At one point, Denise fed my dad a bite of her risotto like they were in some bad rom-com. I remember Ethan and I locking eyes across the table like, is this real life? After dinner, I asked my mom about it point blank. She didn't even blink. Just said, oh, honey, we've been seeing Mark and Denise for years. They're our partners. Partners. Plural. I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She said it in the same tone she uses to recommend lavender oil for anxiety. Completely casual. Totally serious. Apparently, this quad thing had been going on for nearly 6 years at that point. They met through some kind of conscious intimacy retreat, don't even ask, hit it off, and just decided to expand their marriage. Like it was a Costco membership or something. At first, I tried to be cool about it. I mean, I'm not against polyamory. People can do whatever works for them. But it's different when it's your parents. It's different when it's your mom casually talking about Mark's incredible intuition while your dad's pouring wine for Denise like he's on a date. And it's 1,000 times worse when they don't even try to be subtle. Family dinners became an exercise in psychological endurance. They didn't hold back. Ever. We'd be sitting there trying to eat spaghetti, and someone would make a joke about spicing things up later. Or talk about their last group vacation to Palm Springs where they apparently shared a king bed. I wish I was exaggerating. Ethan and I eventually started trying to skip dinners altogether. I moved out of state right after grad school, but every time I came back to visit, it was more of the same. Just more wine, more euphemisms, more oversharing. I once overheard my mom ask Denise if she still had that red satin robe, and I thought my ears were going to start bleeding. It's gotten worse over time, too. Like, they've dropped all pretense. This past Christmas, they gave each other partner-themed gifts in front of the entire extended family. My dad gave Mark a massage gun and winked when he said, "For your recovery nights." My aunt nearly choked on her eggnog. My grandmother looked like she was about to faint. Even Ethan, who normally doesn't care about anything, finally snapped. He straight up walked out of dinner after Sharon said she was grateful for the sensual connection their quad had developed. He got in his car and just left without saying a word. I didn't blame him. I tried confronting them, told them that it was getting too much, that maybe some things didn't need to be shared at every meal. But they looked at me like I was the one with the problem. Jane, my mom said, this is our authentic life. We're not going to apologize for loving openly. Cool. Love openly. But maybe don't talk about tantric workshops while passing the gravy. I think the worst part is how normal they think this is. They honestly believe we should all just celebrate love in its many forms, and that Ethan and I are being rigid for not embracing their lifestyle. It's not that I care what they do in their own time. I really don't. But they've made it impossible to have any kind of normal relationship with them. I can't call home without someone bringing up partner schedules. I can't go to dinner without watching my mom kiss another man. And I can't bring a date home because, well, how the hell do you explain any of this? At one point, I even started seeing a therapist just to help me deal with how much this dynamic had affected me. I'm not ashamed to say it really messed with my head, especially when I realized that a big part of my discomfort wasn't just the sex stuff. It was the betrayal of what I thought my family was. It felt like they'd all joined some private club and forgot to ask if I even wanted to be part of it. So now I'm at a point where I barely talk to them unless I have to. I miss having a family that felt like a family. I miss dinners where I didn't have to hear the word polycule. I miss not feeling grossed out every time someone says the word connection. That's my life, I guess. Polyamorous parents and the eternal dinner table awkwardness that comes with it. Thanks for reading if you made it this far. I stopped by the house last Sunday, not for any real reason other than to see Lindsay and maybe hold baby Sophie for a bit. It had been a stressful week at work, and sometimes, even though my family is a circus, holding my niece somehow made things feel quieter, like there was still something simple and good in the middle of all this chaos. I brought over some of those little frozen fruit teethers Lindsay likes and a bag of organic diapers because apparently that's what the baby's skin prefers. I figured we'd hang out in the basement for a while like we usually did when I visited. Lindsay had kind of made it her own little world down there, with all her stuff organized in neat IKEA bins and Sophie's bassinet in the corner next to an armchair that always smelled like eucalyptus. But the second I walked through the door, something felt off. Sharon greeted me wearing a neon kaftan that looked like it had been tie-dyed by a toddler, and behind her, Denise was barefoot and setting down a tray of hummus and grapes like we were about to have a picnic in the foyer. They both smiled like everything was totally normal. I asked where Lindsay was and Sharon said, "Oh, they're upstairs now." No warning, no explanation, just like that. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what she meant, then asked if she meant visiting upstairs or like living upstairs. She looked at me with that air of spiritual detachment she always gets when she's about to say something completely absurd, and she goes, "No, honey, they've moved into the guest room. Mark and Denise are downstairs now." My mouth actually fell open for a second, and I had to close it before I blurted something inappropriate. I didn't want to lose it in the middle of the foyer, but I felt something shift inside me, like a quiet, cold kind of fury settling into my ribs. I walked past them without another word and went upstairs to find Lindsay. I knocked lightly before opening the door to the guest room and found her sitting cross-legged on the bed, Sophie dozing against her chest, and Kevin hunched over his laptop at the tiny desk in the corner. The room looked cramped and dim, more like a storage closet someone had thrown a bed into than a space for a young couple and a newborn. There were bottles lined up on the windowsill, diapers stacked in bins along the wall, and a pack-and-play shoved into the space between the bed and the closet door. Lindsay looked up at me with a tired smile, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't okay. I sat down next to her, careful not to wake the baby, and just asked, "When did this happen?" She sighed and said it was just a few days ago. Mark and Denise's lease fell through, and apparently the plan was always for them to move in temporarily, but Sharon and Steve decided that the basement made more sense for them because it was more spacious and private. And because Lindsay and Kevin didn't need all that room. Her tone, when she said it, wasn't even angry. It was flat, like she'd used up all her anger and just accepted it. I looked around that cramped room again and felt my blood pressure spike. They gave up the whole basement, the only part of the house with any real space, for Mark and Denise. I asked her if she had a choice in any of this, and she just shook her head. Steve and Sharon made the decision and told them it would be just until Mark and Denise find a new place, but they didn't ask. They never ask. They frame it as if they're the most generous people on earth, offering shelter to loved ones, when really it's just this weird performative kindness that always seems to benefit Mark and Denise the most. I didn't say anything to my parents right away. I stayed up there with Lindsay for a while, helped her fold some baby clothes, held Sophie when she fussed. Kevin didn't say much, but I could tell he was holding in a lot too. He's not the confrontational type, and I think part of him still feels like he's just a guest in this house, even though he's raising a child here and helping with bills. I kept my mouth shut because it wasn't the time, but I could feel the resentment creeping in like a slow leak in a pipe that's about to burst. Eventually, I went back downstairs and tried to act normal, sat in the kitchen while Dad poured wine and talked about how fluid dynamics and family structures were something people just had to evolve with. Denise and Mark came in laughing about some documentary they were watching in the basement, and I just nodded along, sipping from my glass and trying not to let the rage show on my face. They talked about how blessed they were to have found such loving, open-minded housemates, and Sharon chimed in with some crap about redistributing energy where it's needed most. I wanted to scream. This wasn't about energy. This was about a couple in their 50s prioritizing their sexual partners over their own daughter and granddaughter. About pushing a 3-month-old baby into a space barely big enough for a single adult, so two adults who already have way too much influence in this house can play house in the freaking basement like it's their weekend retreat. I left not long after that. I didn't even say goodbye. I just stood up in the middle of a sentence, set my wine glass in the sink, and walked out the door. No one followed me. I got in my car and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, breathing like I had just run a marathon, and trying to decide if this was the moment I finally confronted them or if I should just go home and process it. I ended up driving home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just me and the sound of my tires on the road. And the whole way back, all I could think about was how easily they'd done it, how casually they displaced their own kid and grandchild, and how normal it had all seemed to them. Like we were the ones being unreasonable for not seeing the beauty in their redistributed energy. It wasn't just the basement. It was everything. This was the moment that confirmed what I had started to suspect years ago, that in their version of love and family, there was no room left for boundaries. And now, it seemed, there was no room left for decency either. It had been a few weeks since they moved Lindsay and Kevin upstairs, and I had been trying to keep my distance. Every time I thought about that guest room, about Sophie barely having enough space to stretch her legs on her playmat while Denise and Mark got to stretch out across a fully finished basement, I felt my stomach twist. But what really broke something in me, what finally pushed me past silent resentment and into this deep, simmering disgust, was the moment I heard Denise refer to herself as Grandma Denise. It was a Saturday morning, and I had come over with coffee and a box of those little muffins Lindsay likes, just hoping to have a quiet catch-up. I stepped into the kitchen and immediately heard baby talk floating in from the living room, that exaggerated high-pitched voice people use when they're trying too hard. "Come to Grandma Denise," she cooed, and I froze in the hallway. I peeked around the corner, and there she was, bouncing Sophie on her knee like she had been part of this family since forever. Mark was right next to her, calling himself Grandpa Mark, and making airplane noises while Sophie blinked up at him with that blank baby stare, not knowing any better. My jaw clenched so tight I felt it in my temples. Lindsay was sitting on the arm of the couch, her expression a tight-lipped attempt at neutral, but I knew that look. That was her barely holding it together face. Kevin was standing near the doorway with his arms crossed, and that same tense posture he always gets when he's trying not to lose it in front of Lindsay's parents. I stepped in, gave a little nod, and sat down without saying a word, though I could feel every cell in my body begging to yell. I watched Denise snuggle Sophie closer and say something about how lucky she was to have two sets of grandparents who loved her so much, and I nearly choked on the rage bubbling in my throat. She wasn't her grandmother. She wasn't even family. Just because she shared a bed with my parents didn't make her blood. It didn't give her the right to take that title and wear it like a badge. Later, when Denise and Mark went outside to take a meditative walk through the backyard, whatever that means, I pulled Lindsay aside and asked her point-blank if she was okay with it. She looked exhausted, like the question itself was just another burden on top of the hundreds she already carried. "No," she whispered. "I hate it." She rubbed her temples and glanced over at the baby monitor like she was afraid Denise might hear her through the walls. "Kevin hates it even more. He hasn't said anything to them directly, but he talks about it every night. It's weird. It's just so weird." I asked why they didn't just tell them to stop, and she sighed. "Because every time we even hint that it makes us uncomfortable, Mom says we're being territorial and small-minded. That we need to embrace the idea of a bigger, more inclusive family. She keeps saying this is our family, we are all one. Like we're part of some utopian commune where nobody gets to have boundaries." I had to bite my lip to keep from cursing out loud. Steve and Sharon had never been good at recognizing emotional space, but this was on a whole new level. They had colonized every part of Lindsay's life under the guise of love, and now they were taking over her daughter too. Kevin joined us a few minutes later, his face tight, his tone clipped. "They asked if Sophie can start calling them Grandma and Grandpa," he said, not even trying to hide the disgust in his voice. "Like actually calling them that. Not in front of your parents, just them." That pushed me over the edge. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, then asked what they said. "We deflected," Lindsay muttered. "Kevin said she's too young to say much of anything yet, and I just kind of laughed it off. But they keep pushing, like they're trying to speak it into existence." It made me sick. Denise and Mark had already taken the basement, already crowded out a young couple and their baby. But apparently, that wasn't enough. Now they were trying to embed themselves into the next generation, to rewrite the family script until they were a permanent part of it. I kept thinking about how Sharon always talks about the energy of chosen family. Like that gives her the right to bulldoze through everyone's emotional needs with a smile and a plate of gluten-free scones. Lindsay mentioned that they'd started looking at places to rent. Nothing big, just a one-bedroom somewhere outside of town. "It wouldn't be ideal," she said, "but I can't keep pretending this is okay. I don't want Sophie growing up confused about who her actual grandparents are." Kevin nodded beside her. "We don't have a ton of savings," he admitted, "but I'd rather live in a shoebox we pay for than keep swallowing this crap every day." I didn't say much after that. I didn't have to. We all sat there in the cramped guest room surrounded by baby gear and cheap furniture, and I felt this heavy silence settle between us. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes from three people silently reaching the same conclusion at the same time. This wasn't just about names or space or titles. It was about control. About two people inserting themselves into roles they hadn't earned and refusing to step back when asked. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that my own parents were letting them do it. encouraging it, smiling through it all like it was a gift. I left that day feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not just anger or frustration, something deeper, like watching your family home slowly turn into someone else's house. One where you no longer recognize the rules or the people in charge. When I first heard we were finally going to Orlando, I almost didn't believe it. It had become this mythical idea floating around since 2021, this perfect family vacation we kept talking about but never actually taking. Back then, it was just a vague plan: Disney, maybe Universal, rent a house with a pool, finally do something all together that wasn't a forced dinner or an awkward holiday. It was supposed to be for just us, me, Lindsay, our parents, and our respective partners. Something simple, long overdue, and totally ours. But then life kept getting in the way. First, it was my wedding. Alan and I got married in September 2021, and understandably everything got pushed back because I had enough going on trying to plan a ceremony while dodging my mom's spiritual input about hand-fasting rituals and Denise offering to officiate in the spirit of union. We told them we'd revisit the trip in 2022. And we did, sort of. We even had a Zoom call where we picked tentative dates and Dad sent out links to some rental properties he liked. But then Lindsay got pregnant, and things got murky again. Between the doctor appointments and the stress of figuring out finances, she wasn't in a place to travel, and everyone agreed we should wait until after the baby was born. We finally set the date for February 2023. It felt like a win. For once, we were all on the same page. My mom even started sending me articles about healing retreats near Orlando and places to get fresh-pressed juice near the park. I rolled my eyes, but it felt good to have something to look forward to. I imagined mornings by the pool, dinners as a group, Sophie giggling on her first ride. Finally, something that felt like a real memory in the making. Then, 2 weeks after Christmas, Sharon and Steve dropped the bomb. We were having lunch at their place. Alan and I were in the dining room, plates of roasted vegetables in front of us, and I was feeding the baby a bottle while trying to follow a conversation about stroller-friendly walking trails. That's when my mom said it, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Oh, and by the way, we've booked a room for Mark and Denise. They'll be joining us in Orlando. I didn't react right away. I thought I misheard. I looked at Alan, whose fork was frozen halfway to his mouth, and then back at her. What do you mean they'll be joining us? Sharon smiled like it was a good surprise. They've never been to Disney as a couple. We thought it would be a beautiful experience for all of us, a way to truly connect as a whole family. My heart dropped. I stared at her, feeling my face flush. This was supposed to be our family vacation, I said, carefully, like maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Just us. Steve jumped in with his usual passive calm. And they are family, Jane. You know that. This trip should reflect who we are now. Alan put his fork down. His voice was tight but polite, which only made it worse. With all due respect, this was meant to be a family thing, not a polyamory retreat. The silence that followed was thick. Sharon frowned, and Steve gave one of those sighs like we were disappointing him just by existing. We don't want to feel like we have to segment our love or the people who mean the most to us. This is about togetherness. Togetherness. That word made me want to scream. I wanted to ask if they remembered the years we'd spent talking about this vacation, how much we'd looked forward to it, how Lindsay had been tracking deals on flights for months, how Alan and I were saving up and planning around work schedules. I wanted to remind them that we had asked for this, just once, a chance to feel like a real, simple, non-complicated family again. And instead, they were making it about them. Again, I looked over at Lindsay, who was staring down at her plate like she was trying not to cry. Kevin had his hand on her leg, and his jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. No one said anything for a long time, and then Sharon reached across the table to refill someone's water, like nothing had happened. You'll see, she said gently. This will be beautiful. Alan and I didn't finish our lunch. We made up some excuse about needing to meet someone across town and left quietly. As soon as we got in the car, I could see it all over Alan's face. He was trying not to explode. He didn't say anything until we were halfway home. I'm not sharing a vacation house with them, he finally muttered. I'm not doing it, Jane. I can't pretend like this is normal anymore. Neither could I. That trip had been the last thing I was holding on to. The last chance for a sense of something private, something ours. And now it had turned into yet another stage for my parents' never-ending performance. I had been holding it in for too long, and I knew if I waited any longer, I was going to say something I couldn't walk back. So I called my mom and asked if she and Dad could sit down with me. Just the three of us. No Mark, no Denise, no distractions. She sounded a little surprised, but agreed without question. I told Alan I didn't want him there for this. Not because I didn't need his support, but because I needed them to hear it from me, without it becoming another thing they could write off as influenced by outside perspectives. They set out a pot of herbal tea and lit incense before I even walked in the door, like they were preparing for a negotiation with spirits instead of their own daughter. I sat down at the dining table, the same table I'd eaten countless childhood meals at, and tried to stay calm as Sharon poured me a cup and Steve sat down across from me. Already wearing that unreadable expression he defaults to when he knows something serious is coming. I didn't ease into it. I told them I was uncomfortable, that I had been uncomfortable for a long time, that I had tried, really tried, to be respectful, to be open-minded, to understand their relationship and not judge it, but that it had reached a point where it wasn't just weird or inconvenient anymore. It was invasive. I told them it wasn't about polyamory, it wasn't about who they loved or how many people they wanted in their lives. It was about boundaries, about basic respect. I told them I felt like a third wheel in my own family, that every dinner, every gathering, every holiday had become a performance of their relationship, where their children and now their granddaughter were just awkward witnesses. I told them it was disgusting to me that they didn't hesitate to joke about sex in front of us, that I could barely get through a meal without someone saying something suggestive or playfully intimate, as they called it, while Sophie was sitting right there in a high chair. I told them it made me sick to see them kiss other people in front of their grandchild like it was some kind of open house demonstration. I told them that it wasn't just inappropriate, it was confusing and, frankly, embarrassing. My voice was shaking by the time I said it all. I wasn't yelling, but I could feel the heat under my skin, the pressure in my chest. I had rehearsed the whole thing in my head a dozen times, tried to find a way to say it without sounding like I was attacking them. But as soon as I finished, Sharon didn't even blink. She smiled gently, like she was talking to a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Jane, we are adults," she said, with that infuriating calm tone that made me want to flip the table. "This is our choice. You have to accept it." Steve nodded in agreement, sipping his tea like I hadn't just poured my heart out to them. "You don't have to participate," he said, "but you don't get to dictate how we live our lives." I stared at them, stunned. "I'm not trying to dictate anything," I said slowly. "I'm telling you that your choices are affecting your family, that I don't feel comfortable bringing my husband here anymore, that Lindsay is on the verge of moving out just to protect her daughter from being raised in this mess. Doesn't that matter to you?" Sharon set her cup down and folded her hands. "Of course it matters. But discomfort is often the first step toward growth. Maybe what you're really feeling is resistance to change." It was like talking to a wall, a smug, self-righteous wall covered in affirmation magnets and scented candles. I could feel the words rising in my throat, the frustration turning to something sharper, but I held it back. I stood up instead. "You're not listening," I said. "You're choosing your image, your lifestyle, over your children's comfort, over your granddaughter's sense of normal." Steve looked at me then, with that same soft disappointment he used to give me when I got a B instead of an A. "You've always been a little rigid, Jane. Maybe it's time to expand your definition of family." I walked out without finishing my tea. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the driveway for a few minutes, staring at the house I used to love, wondering how it had become so unfamiliar, wondering how the people who raised me could be so willfully blind to what they were doing, and realizing, maybe for the first time, that they were never going to change. It happened on a Tuesday night, of all times. I had told myself I wasn't going to bring it up again, that I'd already said what I needed to say, but the thought of that Florida trip kept eating at me. It wasn't just the trip anymore. It was everything it represented. I needed one last honest attempt, one more try to make them see me, to make them hear how much it hurt. So I called my mom and asked if she and Dad could talk. She said sure, in that breezy tone she always used when she assumed it was going to be something trivial. When I walked into the living room, they were both already seated on the couch, Sharon with a blanket draped over her knees, and Steve halfway through his kombucha. The air smelled like patchouli and peppermint. I sat down across from them, hands folded tightly in my lap, and I didn't waste time. "I can't go on this trip with them," I said. "I'm not comfortable spending a vacation with people I don't consider family." Sharon blinked once, slowly, like I had just spoken in another language. Steve tilted his head like he was trying to determine if I was serious or not. Then she smiled, polite and thin, and said, "Well, then don't go." It hit me like a punch. No hesitation, no consideration, just a dismissal. Like I had said I didn't like the paint color in the rental house, and not that I was uncomfortable sharing space with two people who had slowly consumed every corner of our family life. I stared at her, waiting for something else, some acknowledgement, some reassurance, but nothing came. She just leaned back and took another sip of tea. "I'm telling you that I don't feel like I belong anymore," I said, my voice cracking a little. "That I feel outnumbered, alienated, like you've made this about them instead of us." Steve set his drink down and finally spoke. "Jane, We've made this about love and inclusion. If you feel alienated, maybe that says more about you than it does about us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I'm the problem, I said. Because I'm not willing to pretend that two people you sleep with are my family. You're being intolerant, Sharon replied calmly. You always talk about how important boundaries are, but where's the flexibility? Where's the compassion? You're being selfish, Jane. You think the world has to conform to your comfort zone. I wanted to scream. It's not about comfort, I said. It's about being part of something that doesn't feel forced. It's about not wanting to spend a week sharing a vacation house with two people I didn't grow up with, who aren't my parents, who aren't Sophie's grandparents, who have no place in the memories I thought we were supposed to be making together. You don't get to decide who is family, Steve said quietly. Not anymore. That was when I realized it. They weren't just failing to hear me. They didn't want to. They had made peace with their version of the story, one where I was the rigid, close-minded one clinging to old definitions, and they were the brave pioneers of emotional evolution. There was no room for my discomfort in their narrative. No space for my pain, because acknowledging it would require them to admit that they had bulldozed over me in the name of freedom. I guess I expected too much, I said finally, standing up. I thought maybe this would still be about us. That this one thing could just be simple. But I was wrong. Sharon didn't argue. She just smiled again, like she pitied me. You're always welcome to join us, Jane, when you're ready. I walked out of that house with a pit in my stomach that I knew wasn't going away anytime soon. Because it wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about how easy it was for them to let me go. I sat with it for a few days. I didn't talk to Alan about it right away because I needed to be sure, and I knew that once I said it out loud, once I made it real, there was no turning back. I kept thinking about the look on Sharon's face when she told me not to go, about the way Steve said I didn't get to decide who was family. I played it over in my head again and again until the silence between us felt heavier than any argument. On Friday afternoon, I called them. No text, no email. I wanted them to hear my voice. I wanted it to be clear. Sharon answered, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. She asked how my week was going, and I didn't bother answering. I told her I wasn't going to Orlando. I said it calmly, directly, with no apology in my voice. I told her that I didn't want to spend a single day, let alone a week, pretending that this new version of our family worked for me when it didn't. I said I wasn't going to stand next to Mark and Denise in vacation photos and pretend like they belonged there while my own feelings were constantly brushed aside. I told her that until she and Dad could acknowledge how much damage they had caused, how much trust they had chipped away at, I would be stepping back. That meant no more visits, no more family meals, no more pretending. I would not keep orbiting a system that refused to see me. There was silence on the other end. No protest. No surprise. Just a slow, quiet breath. Then she said, that's your choice, Jane. And then, we support Mark and Denise completely. They are our family, whether you choose to be part of that or not. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some hesitation. Maybe even a little sadness. But there was nothing in her voice. No emotion. Just finality. I thanked her for her time, as ridiculous as that sounds now, and hung up. That was the last real conversation I had with either of them. They still post photos in the family group chat like nothing happened. Pictures of Sophie on Mark's lap, captions calling Denise Nana D. Updates from the trip planning, even restaurant menus. I muted the thread. Lindsay did too, eventually. We never talked about it directly, but I could tell by the way she stopped mentioning them altogether that she had reached her own limit. It's been cold ever since. No texts from my dad, no thinking of you messages from my mom. Just the occasional passive-aggressive quote reposted on Facebook about unconditional love and letting go of negativity, usually liked by Denise. Alan's parents sent us a postcard last week with a note that simply said, your real family is proud of you. It made me cry, harder than I expected. I didn't want to cut them off. That was never the plan. But after years of being treated like an outsider in my own family, it wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. And when people show you that your pain doesn't matter, that your discomfort is inconvenient, that their freedom is more important than your sense of belonging, the only thing left to do is walk away. So I did. Lindsay texted me the night I made the call. It was late, past midnight, and all she wrote was, did you do it? I didn't need to ask what she meant. I replied with a simple, yes, and 2 minutes later she was calling me, whispering from the cramped guest room like she was trying not to wake Kevin or Sophie. Her voice sounded shaky at first, like she wasn't sure how to say what she wanted, but after a few seconds she exhaled and said, I'm proud of you. That meant more than she probably knew. She told me she had been feeling the same way for months, that every time she walked past the basement stairs, she felt like she was stepping over a line that used to belong to her. That Denise now kept baby supplies down there just in case, as if she were waiting for Sophie to be passed to her without asking. That Mark had started calling himself Grandpa, even when Kevin wasn't around, as if repetition would make it true. And worst of all, Sharon had started telling her how natural it was for children to have many forms of family. When Lindsay pushed back, her own mother called her emotionally rigid. She said she hadn't told anyone yet, but she wasn't sure she could go to Orlando either. That the idea of putting Sophie in a vacation house with 4 adults she no longer trusted made her stomach turn. It's like letting her be raised in a performance, she said. And I'm supposed to applaud. We stayed on the phone for over an hour. No anger, no strategy, just 2 sisters trying to process what our family had become. She asked if I really felt okay with cutting them off, and I told her I didn't feel okay. Not really, but I felt lighter. That for once, I didn't feel like I was stuck holding the door open for people who never once looked back to see if I was still standing there. That's when she said it. If I back out of the trip, she asked, do you want to go somewhere? Just us. I didn't even hesitate. Yes. She mentioned the North Carolina coast, somewhere quiet. Nothing fancy. Maybe a rental near Wilmington, or something with a screened-in porch and a view of the ocean. A place where we could breathe, where no one would be talking about expanding definitions of family, or pouring kombucha in the middle of a meltdown. Just the 2 of us, and Sophie in a sun hat. The next day, we started sending each other listings. Little houses with white siding, old beach cottages with worn furniture and homemade quilts, places with hammocks and sand that gets into everything and the kind of stillness you only get near water. We didn't book anything yet. Lindsay still hadn't made her decision about the Orlando trip, but just the act of planning felt like a kind of rebellion, a way to draw our own line, even if it was temporary. That night, she sent me a picture of Sophie curled up on her chest, both of them half asleep, and the message said, she deserves peace too. And I knew then that even though everything else felt broken, this thread between me and Lindsay, was stronger than ever. Some mornings I still reach for my phone and think about texting Sharon. Before I remember, I don't do that anymore. It's like a ghost habit, muscle memory that hasn't caught up to reality. I used to send her photos of my garden or updates about the house. Nothing big, just the kinds of small details that kept the thread between us alive. Now I scroll past her contact without tapping it. I haven't blocked her. I don't think I ever will. But that space has gone quiet, and it stays that way. It's been months since I've seen them. There are no more surprise visits, no last-minute family dinners where Denise slides in beside my dad, like she's always been there. No more awkward silences filled with someone's comment about open love while I push food around my plate. My life has gotten quieter, simpler. The noise they brought with them, the constant dance around what I was supposed to tolerate, has finally stopped. I can breathe now, and that's something. That peace, as small as it is, feels earned. But the grief is real too. There's a kind of sadness that follows you around when your parents are still alive, but no longer reachable in the ways that matter. I see families at the park sometimes, moms holding their grandchildren, dads pushing strollers, and I get hit with this ache that's hard to describe. Not jealousy exactly, just absence. A missing shape in my life that used to be filled with the idea of who they were supposed to be. And now that space just echoes. I still have the old birthday cards they wrote, the ones before everything got twisted. I keep them in a drawer I don't open often. But when I do, I read the words over again like I'm studying a foreign language I used to be fluent in. There's something unbearable about realizing that people who once swore they'd do anything for you can now watch you walk away and not follow. They didn't try. That's what gets me. They didn't fight to keep me. They stood by Mark and Denise without flinching, as if loyalty to those 2 meant more than years of memories with their own daughter. And still, I don't regret stepping away. I don't miss the emotional negotiations. I don't miss sitting through family meals and pretending not to hear the whispers and jokes that made my skin crawl. I don't miss the forced, we're all one family narrative that asked me to erase what I felt in the name of being open-minded. For once in my life, my boundaries are not up for debate. I don't have to apologize for needing space or dignity or the ability to be around my family without pretending it doesn't hurt. Alan says I'm lighter now, that I laugh more, sleep deeper, that I've started looking forward instead of sideways. I think he's right. But even on the good days, there's still this quiet question that follows me. How did it come to this? How did the people who raised me become strangers? And will they ever look back and understand what they lost? Maybe they won't. Maybe they already decided I was the one who walked away, and they'll never see that I was just the first to stop pretending. What I know now is that peace doesn't mean the pain goes away. It just means I finally stopped bleeding for people who never asked where it hurt. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months to the day since I told them I wasn't going to Florida, since I drew the line and stepped away for good. I was standing in line at the post office, holding a padded envelope under my arm and half listening to a kid crying behind me, when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I didn't recognize the number right away. It wasn't saved under a name anymore. But I knew at the moment I saw the area code and those familiar digits. It was one sentence. No greeting. No punctuation. Just, maybe this time you will realize that family is not just blood. I read it 3 times. Then I locked my phone and slipped it back into my coat like it was something hot I didn't want to hold. I didn't reply. I didn't feel anything at first. No rush of anger. No hope. Just that strange hollow quiet that comes when you realize you've finally crossed the distance you thought would always pull you back. For months I had turned that word over in my mind, family. I had tried to make it stretch to fit what my parents had become, tried to imagine a version of it where love looked like constant compromise, like being told over and over again that your discomfort was the cost of someone else's freedom. But when I read that message, I knew with total clarity that I didn't believe that anymore. Family isn't just blood. He's right about that. But it also isn't a license to bulldoze people's boundaries and call it love. It's not something you get to redefine when it suits your need for validation. It's not a flag you plant in someone else's life and then demand they salute it. For me, family is people who see you clearly. People who ask, does this hurt you? Before they ask you to carry something heavy. People who respect your no as much as your yes. Who don't turn your silence into a statement about how closed off you are. People who don't twist their choices into your obligations. That message, whether he meant it as peace or provocation, only confirmed what I'd already decided. I finally chose myself. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel selfish. I feel whole. I don't need to explain or defend it anymore. I don't need them to understand why I left. It's enough that I know I did it to protect something I've spent years letting other people walk all over, my own peace. So that's where it ends. Not in a dramatic blow-up or a reconciliation. Just in a message I didn't answer and a boundary that finally held.